I was 9 years old the day the galaxy decided it did not want us anymore. I remember sitting on the floor of our kitchen on Luna, watching my mother stand at the counter with her back to me. She was a xenolinguist. She had spent 30 years of her life learning the language of the Shen, a species whose vocal cords produced sounds that human throats could not naturally copy, whose written script moved from center to edge in spiraling rings, whose concept of time ran backward from the present moment, rather than forward into the future. She had learned all of it. She had translated 4,000 documents. She had been invited to their homeworld twice, which no human had been before her, and she had sat in rooms with their elders and been trusted. That morning, she received a message telling her that her post had been dissolved and her access credentials revoked. The Galactic Conclave had passed Resolution 7 Omega the night before. The vote was 214 to 1. The single vote against it was humanity's own. My mother did not cry. She stood at the counter for a long time. Then she went to her study, pulled every printed translation from the shelves, brought them to the kitchen, and burned them one page at a time in the sink. I did not understand what was happening. I only understood that the fire was small and quiet, and that she never looked up from it. I never forgot that fire. Everything I became grew from that kitchen. The official charge against humanity was unregulated territorial expansion and cultural contamination. That was what the Conclave's legal record said. But I have read every document, every internal debate log, every private communique exchanged between Conclave member species in the years before the vote. The real charge was simpler and harder to argue against. We were too much. We expanded too fast, too confidently, and with too much creativity. In 80 years we had colonized 14 worlds, out-traded the Vreth in their own markets, outbuilt the Kalon in deep space construction, and won 3 separate legal disputes against the Shen in conclave arbitration. We made the galaxy nervous. And nervous species, when they find each other, vote the same way. The embargo came within weeks of the resolution. Our FTL transit keys were revoked. The lane network that connected every settled system in the conclave closed to human vessels. Supply ships already in transit were flagged and turned back. The 14 colonies began to feel the pressure almost immediately. Pharmaceutical imports, agricultural technology, spare components for atmospheric processors on worlds that could not yet breathe on their own. Within a decade, the outer colonies were not dying, but they were struggling in ways they had never struggled before. Earth fractured. 3 factions rose in the years that followed. The secessors wanted to negotiate, to apologize, to find whatever combination of words would open the lane network again. The isolationists said no, seal humanity in, endure, survive on what we had. The third faction was quieter, smaller at first. They did not have a formal name in the early years. They simply said, if the galaxy will not have us, then we will build our own. My mother, after the fire, joined the third faction. I did not know that until I was much older. I joined the Compact Defense Force at 19, at a station on a world called Kepler that my mother never lived to see. She died on Luna when I was 31, 3 years before the Fold transit engine completed its first successful test. She never knew what came next. I have always carried that as a quiet sadness, not grief exactly, but a specific kind of loss that has no name, the feeling of wanting someone to see the thing they helped make possible. The Fold transit engine changed everything. For 80 years, our physicists had been working without access to the Conclave's shared research network, without the collaborative infrastructure that connected the greatest scientific minds in known space. That isolation, which was intended to weaken us, did something else instead. It forced us to solve the problem differently. The Conclave's FTL lane network worked by mapping stable corridors in space and encoding access keys into each vessel's drive system. Our physicists stopped trying to use corridors. They asked a different question. What if we folded the space between 2 points instead of traveling through it? It took longer. It was harder. But when it worked, it could not be blocked, could not be detected until the moment of arrival, and did not require anyone's permission. We used it to go further than the Conclave's maps reached. Beyond the border of known space, into what we called the outer quiet, we found 70 uninhabited systems. We filled them with people, and in the middle of that vast, dark, unclaimed region of the galaxy, we found that we were not alone. The Drevari had been expelled from the conclave 600 years before us. They lived in generation ships, enormous, aging vessels that moved between systems on slow conventional drives, never staying anywhere long enough to claim it. Their technology had not advanced significantly since their exile. They had no fold transit. They had no new worlds. They had only each other, and a very old and very deep bitterness that I recognized the moment I looked into the eyes of their first council member across a diplomatic table. We did not offer them charity. We offered them partnership. We shared our fold transit specifications. We helped them survey a system we called Auris, and on its fourth planet, a warm and mineral-rich world with 2 pale moons, they built their first permanent home in 6 centuries. They named the planet themselves. They called it Remembered. The Drevari became the second member species of what would eventually be called the Terran Compact. They were not the last. Over the following century, 5 more species joined us. Each of them had been expelled from the conclave, or ignored by it, or quietly pushed to the edges of known space where no one would have to think about them. The Aushari brought biological science that transformed our medicine. The Methic brought a knowledge of metallurgy that allowed us to build ship hulls capable of surviving stresses that would have destroyed anything in the conclave's fleet. The twin-brained Ual, each individual carrying 2 separate cognitive processes that ran in parallel, rewrote our weapons theory so completely that our own engineers had to spend 5 years understanding what had been handed to them. And the Coral, a silicon-based collective distributed across hundreds of individual units, brought something that is harder to quantify: patience and perspective, and the calm certainty of something very old that had been watching the conclave for a long time and knew exactly what it feared. We never called ourselves an empire. The Drevari called us that, meaning it as the highest possible honor. We accepted the word eventually, in the way you accept a name given to you by someone you love and respect. By the time I was given command of the Unyielding, I had served for 260 years. Longevity treatment had become standard in the compact by my 80th year, a product of Aushari biological science combined with human biochemistry, and so I had outlived things that people in my mother's generation would not have expected anyone to outlive. 6 crews, 1 husband, a Drevari human cultural liaison named Tev, who had dark eyes, and an extraordinary patience with my silences, who died not in battle, but quietly, in our quarters on New Carthage, with his hand in mine, and a look on his face that I will not describe here, because some things belong only to the people who lived them. I carried the names of everyone I had lost in a file I updated manually, every year, without letting the ship's system auto-complete a single entry. It was a small thing, but it kept the names from becoming data. The Unyielding was the flagship of the Compact Response Fleet. 1,400 vessels, carrying 7 species, built over 3 generations of cooperative engineering that the Conclave did not know existed. We had maintained our silence carefully. We had let them watch a dark window for 300 years and assumed the darkness meant defeat. It did not occur to them that we had simply moved the house. The trigger came in my 304th year of life. The Conclave issued a declaration claiming Auris system, the Drevari homeworld, the planet called Remembered, as an unclaimed reclamation zone under an obscure clause of Conclave expansion law. They sent a colonization fleet of 80 vessels. The Drevari High Council contacted me within the hour. The message was short. The voice on the other end of it was a woman I had known for 60 years, steady and unshakable in every situation I had ever seen her in, and even she could not entirely keep the fear out of her voice. I told her we were coming. I did not wait for authorization. I drafted the deployment order and submitted it to the Compact Council for ratification, knowing they would approve it before we even reached the fold transit threshold. They did. We arrived in Auris system 12 minutes after the Conclave fleet entered it. 1,400 vessels, fold transited into position, appearing on every sensor array in that system simultaneously, without warning. The Conclave fleet had 80 ships. Their lead vessel spent 40 seconds trying to count us before opening a channel. I was the one who answered. I identified myself calmly. I identified my ship, my rank, my government. I told them that the Terran Compact recognized no jurisdiction claim over Auris 4. that the planet was sovereign Dravari territory under compact protection, and that their fleet would withdraw. I told them they would not be harmed. I told them they would go. There was a silence on the channel that lasted longer than the 40 seconds it had taken them to count our ships. Then, without a single word in response, the Conclave fleet began to move, slowly, in the direction they had come from. They did not look back, as far as sensors could tell, but I watched them go, and I felt something settle in me that had been unsettled since I was 9 years old, on a kitchen floor watching a small fire burn. The summit was held 6 weeks later. The Conclave wanted to meet on their capital world. I suggested New Carthage instead. After 4 days of back and forth between diplomatic liaisons, they agreed. The summit chamber on New Carthage held delegations from 214 species. I walked in with 6 people, 1 human, 1 Dravari, 1 Oshuri, 1 Methic, 1 Ual, and a coral liaison orb that floated quietly at my left shoulder, its surface shifting with soft light in patterns that its species used to indicate calm attention. We sat across from the full weight of the conclave, and the chamber was very quiet for a long moment. The Vreth elder who led the conclave delegation was a figure I had read about in history records since my 20s. His species had been among the most vocal in the original vote that passed Resolution 7 Omega. He was very old, even by Vreth standards, and he looked at the 6 of us with an expression that I can only describe as someone in the process of understanding something they had refused to understand for a very long time. He asked, quietly, how many worlds the compact administered. I told him. He was silent for a moment, then the summit began. Our terms were not what they expected. We did not ask to rejoin the conclave. We did not ask for an apology, though the question of a formal record was not small to us. We asked for recognition of the Terran Compact as a co-equal governing body in galactic affairs. We asked for open FTL lane access for all Compact member species. We asked for a review process for every species that had been expelled from the Conclave over the previous 1,000 years, with the option of Compact membership for those who wanted it. And we asked that Resolution 7 Omega be formally recorded in the Conclave's own archives as an act of fear rather than law, with an acknowledgement of the harm it had caused to 14 human colonies and to the generations of people who had grown up under the embargo. That last point was the hardest for them. The rest was practical. The last point required them to look at themselves. They argued for 6 days. I sat in that chamber for most of it, and I listened, and I did not raise my voice once. On the 7th day, they signed. I signed for humanity. My hand did not shake. I am writing this final entry from the observation deck of the Unyielding, in orbit above Conclave Prime. The planet is visible through the viewport, blue and white, not so different from Earth, which I have not visited in 40 years, but which I carry in me the way everyone carries the first place they ever understood as home. I think about my mother sometimes, in moments like this. She would have been furious with me for certain decisions I made in the long middle years. She would have wanted more patience, more diplomacy, fewer unilateral deployment orders. She spent her life building bridges, and believed, until the end, that understanding between different kinds of minds was always possible if you sat still long enough and listened hard enough. I think she was right. I also think that sometimes, before the listening can happen, someone has to stand in a doorway and make very clear that the door will not be closed again. She burned her translations because she believed it was over. I am writing this because it was not. The galaxy banished us because we were too much. We came back as more, and we brought everyone with us that the galaxy had also tried to forget. I do not know what comes next. No one does. I have lived 300 years, and I still do not know what comes next. And I have made my peace with that, and I think my mother would have understood. That uncertainty, the not knowing, the going forward anyway, is still, after everything, the most human thing about us.